When today's rich and famous tech companies talk about what they do, they usually say something like, "We are connecting the world." And by that, they mean we are creating a sexualized Farmville that is as addictive as opioids. So when I learned that last year's best-performing stock by growth was a Silicon Valley unicorn by the name of Palantir, I was pretty sure I knew what they were up to. Probably they made a streaming service called Boo Boo, a housing rental app called Housely, or earbuds called Doinkers or whatever. But just to be sure, I looked them up, at which point it became clear that these cats are a little different from the techies who typically cross my desk. We built this kill chain, the digital kill chain. How do you defend your country and kill your enemies? Our product is used on occasion to kill people. The digital kill chain, from find to finish. When military strategists talk about the kill chain, they're referring to a systematic process that has defined modern warfare for decades. Find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. This isn't video game terminology. It's the cold, calculated sequence that determines whether a threat is neutralized or whether soldiers come home alive. In the dusty streets of Iraq and the mountain valleys of Afghanistan, this process could take hours or even days. An IED explodes. Intelligence analysts pore over drone footage, trying to identify the bomb maker. They cross-reference cell phone data, financial transactions, and human intelligence reports. By the time they've connected the dots, the insurgents have melted back into the civilian population, leaving behind only crater and casualties. Palantir's software fundamentally compresses this timeline. Their platform ingests massive streams of data, satellite imagery, intercepted communications, financial records, social media posts, and uses artificial intelligence to identify patterns that would take human analysts weeks to uncover. What once required a room full of intelligence officers can now be accomplished by algorithms working at machine speed. Consider Ukraine's current conflict. Russian artillery positions that might have taken hours to locate through traditional reconnaissance are now identified within minutes through a combination of satellite imagery and drone surveillance, all processed through Palantir's systems. Ukrainian forces can track Russian troop movements, predict supply routes, and coordinate counter-battery fire with unprecedented precision. The sensor-to-shooter timeline, the gap between detecting a target and engaging it, has shrunk from hours to minutes. This isn't just about making warfare more efficient, it's about fundamentally changing its nature. In Afghanistan, insurgents could plant an IED and disappear into a crowd. Now that same bomb maker leaves a digital fingerprint across dozens of data sources. His cell phone connects to towers. His face appears on security cameras. His financial transactions create patterns. Palantir's algorithms weave these threads together, creating what the company calls the digital kill chain, a web of data so comprehensive that anonymity becomes nearly impossible. The technology's impact extends beyond individual operations. In Iraq, coalition forces struggled with the classic problem of fighting an enemy that looked like everyone. Decoding the corporate speak. A quick spin through their site will tell you that Palantir is all about AI-powered automation for every decision and delivering mission-critical outcomes for the West's most powerful institutions. This language is deliberately different from the sunny optimism that characterizes most Silicon Valley marketing. While Facebook promises to connect the world and Google wants to organize the world's information, Palantir speaks in the stark vocabulary of national security and existential threat. There's no pretense here about making the world more open or building communities. Instead, you'll find phrases like decision superiority, battlefield advantage, and defending democratic institutions. The contrast is striking and intentional. Most tech companies position themselves as democratizing forces, putting powerful tools in everyone's hands, breaking down barriers, creating platforms where anyone can participate. Palantir's messaging does the opposite. It emphasizes exclusivity, selectivity, and the critical importance of keeping these capabilities in the right hands. They're not building for everyone. They're building for the West's most powerful institutions. This isn't accidental corporate positioning. It reflects a fundamental philosophical divide within Silicon Valley about technology's role in society. The dominant narrative for the past 2 decades has been technology as liberation, freeing information, connecting people, disrupting traditional hierarchies. Palantir represents technology as preservation, protecting existing power structures, maintaining democratic stability, and ensuring that liberal democracies maintain their competitive advantage against authoritarian rivals. Their marketing materials read less like typical tech company copy and more like defense contractor proposals. You won't find promises about changing the world or empowering individuals. Instead, Palantir talks about maintaining strategic advantage and protecting national interests. Even their AI isn't positioned as making life more convenient or fun. It's framed as an existential necessity for survival in an increasingly dangerous world. This rhetoric serves a dual purpose. It signals to government clients that Palantir understands the stakes and takes security seriously. But it also insulates the company from the growing backlash against big tech's social impact. By positioning themselves as defenders rather than disruptors, Palantir avoids many of the regular...
The financial rocket ship Palantir stock is booming, absolutely skyrocketing. Palantir has been a standout this week, surging 22%. Their stock rocketed up 340% in 2024, peaking this winter to give them a valuation of over $250 billion. The numbers tell a story that even seasoned Wall Street analysts find remarkable. Palantir's revenue hit approximately $2.2 billion in 2024, representing year-over-year growth of around 25%. Impressive for any company, but particularly striking for one that took nearly 2 decades to achieve consistent profitability. More importantly, 2024 marked the first year Palantir achieved GAAP profitability, a milestone that had eluded the company since its founding. To put this valuation in perspective, Palantir is now worth more than Lockheed Martin, one of the world's largest defense contractors with over a century of weapons manufacturing experience. It's valued higher than IBM, the technology giant that has been selling enterprise software since before Silicon Valley existed. Even compared to Snowflake, the cloud data company that was once considered the hottest enterprise software stock, Palantir's valuation seems astronomical. But raw financials don't fully explain Palantir's stock performance. Something unusual has happened. Palantir has become a meme stock, developing a cult following among retail investors that's typically reserved for companies like GameStop or Tesla. On Reddit's Wall Street Bets, Palantir discussions generate thousands of comments from investors who call themselves Palantirians. TikTok is filled with young traders posting videos about Daddy Karp, CEO Alex Karp, with the kind of devotion usually reserved for pop stars. This retail investor enthusiasm creates a feedback loop that traditional valuation models struggle to capture. Unlike institutional investors who focus on price-to-earnings ratios and revenue multiples, retail investors are betting on narrative and momentum. They see Palantir as the intersection of artificial intelligence, national defense, and geopolitical competition. 3 of the most compelling investment themes of the decade. The fact that the company's software is reportedly being used in Ukraine adds a real-world urgency that most tech stocks lack. The meme stock phenomenon has created a paradox. Palantir's valuation is driven partly by the same social media dynamics that... The risk, of course, is that this valuation is unsustainable. Palantir still derives more than half its revenue from government contracts, making it vulnerable to political changes and budget cuts. Unlike consumer tech companies that can scale to millions or billions of users, Palantir's customer base remains limited to large institutions with massive data problems. The question isn't whether Palantir's technology is valuable, it clearly is, but whether that value justifies a $250 billion market capitalization. The origin story. From PayPal fraud to counter-terrorism. They got their start going back to 2003 during the War on Terror. The story of Palantir begins not in a Stanford dorm room or a Palo Alto garage, but in the aftermath of 9/11, when it became clear that America's intelligence apparatus was fundamentally broken. But to understand how Palantir emerged, you need to go back further, to a different kind of war being fought in the digital realm, the battle against online fraud at PayPal. Peter Thiel, already wealthy from PayPal's sale to eBay, had watched his company's fraud detection algorithms evolve from simple rule-based systems to sophisticated pattern recognition engines that could identify suspicious transactions across millions of accounts. The technology wasn't just blocking stolen credit cards, it was uncovering organized crime networks, mapping relationships between fraudsters across different countries, and predicting criminal behavior before it happened. Thiel realized this same approach could revolutionize intelligence work. His co-founder, Alex Karp, represented everything Thiel was not. A philosophy PhD who had studied at Stanford and the London School of Economics, someone more comfortable discussing Nietzsche than network effects. Karp had spent years thinking about power structures, social systems, and the philosophical foundations of liberal democracy. While Thiel saw opportunity in applying PayPal's technology to national security, Karp saw a moral imperative to preserve democratic institutions against existential threats. The technical foundation came from Nathan Gettings and Stephen Cohen, engineers who understood how to build systems that could process vast amounts of unstructured data and find meaningful patterns. They weren't just creating another database or analytics platform. They were building what would become known as intelligence augmentation, software that could amplify human analytical capabilities rather than replace them. The timing was crucial. In 2003, the Department of Defense was struggling with what intelligence professionals call the connect the dots problem. The CIA had one piece of information about suspicious flight school students. The FBI had separate intelligence about unusual financial transactions. The NSA had intercepted communications that might be relevant, but these agencies didn't share information effectively. Their computer systems couldn't talk to each other, and nobody had tools sophisticated enough to identify patterns across these different data sources.
This wasn't just a technology problem, it was a cultural and institutional challenge. Intelligence agencies are naturally secretive and competitive. Sharing information feels dangerous because it reduces individual agency power and increases the risk of leaks. Traditional software companies had tried to solve this with standardized databases and communication protocols, but they missed the deeper issue. Intelligence work isn't about storing information. It's about understanding relationships and predicting behavior. Palantir's insight was that the same techniques PayPal used to identify fraudulent transactions could be applied to identify terrorist networks. Just as credit card fraudsters leave digital fingerprints across multiple financial systems, terrorists and other threats create patterns of behavior that become visible when you have the right tools and sufficient data. A terrorist doesn't just buy a plane ticket. He gets training, communicates with handlers, moves money, travels, and interacts with other people who are also doing suspicious things. The early years were extraordinarily difficult. Government procurement moved slowly, and intelligence agencies were skeptical of a startup founded by Silicon Valley entrepreneurs with no security clearances. Palantir had to prove not just that their technology worked, but that they could be trusted with the most sensitive national security information. They hired former CIA and NSA officials, went through extensive security reviews, and spent years building relationships within the intelligence community. But the PayPal connection provided more than just technical inspiration. It gave Palantir a business model that could survive the lengthy government sales cycles. Just as PayPal had started by solving one specific problem, online payments, and expanded into a broader financial platform, Palantir began by focusing on counter-terrorism and gradually expanded into other domains where similar analytical challenges existed. David versus Goliath. Palantir takes on the defense primes. The companies we're talking about here are commonly known as the big defense primes: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. Understanding Palantir's place in the defense ecosystem requires grasping just how different it is from the traditional defense contractors that have dominated military procurement for decades. The defense primes built their empires on hardware: fighter jets, missiles, ships, and tanks that take years or even decades to design, test, and manufacture. Their business model assumes long development cycles, massive capital investments, and products that remain essentially unchanged for decades once deployed. Lockheed Martin's F-35 fighter jet program, for example, began in the 1990s and won't be fully operational until well into the 2030s. The total program cost will exceed $400 billion,
making it the most expensive weapons system in history. But once an F-35 rolls off the production line, its core capabilities are essentially fixed. Upgrades require extensive testing, regulatory approval, and often physical modifications to the aircraft. Palantir represents the opposite philosophy: rapid iteration, continuous improvement, and software that can be updated as quickly as threats evolve. Their platform doesn't just get better over time, it learns and adapts to new challenges without requiring entirely new procurement cycles. This difference becomes crucial in conflicts like Ukraine, where tactical innovations happen weekly, and the side that adapts faster often wins. The company's secret weapon is Apollo, their DevOps platform that manages software deployment across secure and often air-gapped military networks. Traditional defense contractors struggle with military IT requirements because military networks are intentionally isolated from the internet for security reasons. Updating software in these environments typically requires physical media, extensive testing, and lengthy approval processes that can take months or years. Apollo solves this by creating secure channels for rapid software updates, even in classified environments. It's like having a private app store for military applications, where new features and capabilities can be pushed to users as quickly as they're developed. This means an intelligence analyst in Afghanistan can receive the same software improvements as a Pentagon planner, often within days of development rather than years. Army Vantage provides a perfect case study of how this difference plays out in practice. Traditional defense contractors would approach military readiness monitoring by building custom hardware sensors, proprietary communication protocols, and specialized software that takes years to develop and deploy. The result would be a system that works exactly as specified, but can't easily adapt to new requirements or integrate with other systems. Palantir's approach was fundamentally different. Instead of building new hardware, they created software that could integrate with existing military systems, pulling data from dozens of different sources to create a unified picture of readiness across the entire army. When commanders needed new capabilities, say, predictive maintenance algorithms or supply chain optimization, these could be developed and deployed in months rather than years. But the most important difference isn't technical, it's cultural. Defense primes have learned to work within the Pentagon's bureaucratic processes, which prioritize predictability, extensive documentation, and risk avoidance. This made sense when military capabilities changed slowly and conflicts lasted years or decades. But modern conflicts are increasingly dynamic, with new technologies and tactics emerging constantly. Palantir's engineers embed directly with military units, working alongside soldiers and commanders to understand their real-world challenges and iterate on solutions rapidly. This is fundamentally different from the traditional defense contractor approach of gathering requirements, disappearing for several years to build something, and then delivering a finished product that may or may not solve the actual problem. The tension between these approaches becomes visible in congressional hearings and Pentagon strategy documents. Traditional defense officials worry about Palantir's rapid iteration model because it's harder to plan and budget for. How do you write a contract for software that will continuously evolve? How do you test and validate capabilities that change monthly? These are legitimate concerns, but they also reflect institutional resistance to the kind of adaptability that modern warfare demands. The government's secret weapon, Palantir's defense contracts. Palantir has landed over $1.3 billion in Department of Defense contracts since 2009. That figure represents more than just revenue. It's a measure of how deeply Palantir has penetrated America's national security apparatus. But the real story lies in the specific programs that make up this total, each representing a different aspect of how artificial intelligence is reshaping modern warfare and intelligence gathering. Project Maven stands out as perhaps the most significant and controversial of these contracts. When Google employees discovered their company was helping the Pentagon analyze drone footage to identify potential targets, the internal backlash was swift and severe. Thousands of employees signed petitions, some resigned in protest, and Google ultimately decided not to renew the contract. Into this vacuum stepped Palantir, which had no qualms about applying AI to what military officials euphemistically call kinetic operations. Maven isn't just about replacing human analysts with algorithms, It's about fundamentally changing how modern militaries process the overwhelming amount of surveillance data they collect. Every day, American drones and satellites capture thousands of hours of video and millions of images across multiple conflict zones. Human analysts can't possibly review all this material, which means critical intelligence often goes unnoticed until it's too late to act on. Palantir's Maven algorithms don't just identify objects in drone footage. They understand context, track changes over time, and predict future behavior. The system can identify not just vehicles but patterns of life, unusual activity, and potential threats that would be invisible to human observers. More importantly, it can do this analysis in real time, enabling commanders to make decisions based on current rather than hours-old information. Army Vantage represents a different kind of revolution, the application of commercial AI techniques to military logistics and readiness. Traditional military planning relied on reports that were often weeks old by the time they reached decision-makers. Equipment readiness, personnel status, and supply levels were tracked through separate systems that couldn't communicate with each other, creating a fog of uncertainty around military capabilities. Vantage creates what military planners call decision superiority, the ability to understand your own forces better than your adversary understands theirs.
But perhaps the most futuristic of Palantir's military applications is the Titan AI Battle Vehicle project, which represents the company's vision of how artificial intelligence will reshape ground combat. Traditional military vehicles are essentially isolated platforms. They can see what their sensors detect and communicate through radio, but they operate independently without shared situational awareness. Titan creates a networked battlefield where every vehicle, drone, and soldier becomes part of a larger sensing and decision-making network. Enemy positions identified by one platform are immediately shared with all others. Threats detected by satellites are pushed to ground forces in real time. The system doesn't just coordinate attacks, it coordinates everything, from supply deliveries to medical evacuations, creating what military theorists call multi-domain operations. The technology's impact on soldier cognitive load is particularly significant. Modern warfare places enormous mental demands on combatants, who must process information from multiple sources while making life-and-death decisions under extreme stress. Palantir's systems are designed to filter this information flow, presenting only the most relevant data in formats that enable rapid decision-making. These projects are strategically important because they represent America's attempt to maintain military superiority in an era when traditional advantages are eroding. China and Russia are developing their own AI-powered military systems, and the country that deploys these capabilities most effectively may gain decisive advantages in future conflicts. But they're also controversial because they raise fundamental questions about the role of artificial intelligence in warfare and the ethics of automated decision-making in life-and-death situations. Critics argue that systems like Maven and Titan lower the barriers to conflict by making warfare more automated and less human. Supporters contend that these tools actually make warfare more precise and reduce civilian casualties by enabling more accurate targeting and better situational awareness. Both perspectives reflect deeper anxieties about how artificial intelligence is changing the nature of human conflict. Pandemic pivot from warfare to public health. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the US contracted Palantir to track outbreak data and set up vaccine distribution. The pandemic revealed something unexpected about Palantir's technology. The same systems designed to track terrorists and coordinate military operations could be rapidly adapted to fight a different kind of threat. When COVID-19 emerged, governments worldwide faced a data problem remarkably similar to the intelligence challenges Palantir had been solving for nearly 2 decades. Disparate information sources, rapidly changing situations, and the need to make critical decisions based on incomplete and constantly evolving data. Palantir Foundry, the company's primary data integration platform, became the backbone of America's pandemic response logistics. The system integrated data from hospitals, state health departments, vaccine manufacturers, and distribution centers to create a real-time picture of the pandemic's evolution and the government's response capabilities.
For the first time, federal officials could see not just how many vaccines were available, but where they were located, how quickly they could be distributed, and which populations most urgently needed them. The efficiency gains were dramatic. Traditional public health systems relied on weekly reports submitted through different formats to different agencies, creating delays and inconsistencies that made rapid response nearly impossible. Palantir's system updated continuously, allowing officials to track outbreak patterns, predict hospital capacity needs, and optimize vaccine distribution routes in real time. States using Palantir's platform could identify vaccine shortages and surpluses within hours rather than weeks, enabling rapid redistribution that likely saved thousands of lives. But the pandemic work also expanded Palantir's reach far beyond American borders. In the United Kingdom, NHS England contracted Palantir to manage hospital capacity planning and vaccine logistics across the country's complex healthcare system. The platform integrated data from hundreds of hospitals and thousands of primary care providers, creating unprecedented visibility into the healthcare system's performance during the crisis. The UK implementation demonstrated Palantir's ability to adapt to different institutional contexts and regulatory environments. Unlike the American system, which emphasizes federal coordination with state implementation, the NHS required integration across different health trusts, each with their own systems and protocols. Palantir's platform proved flexible enough to.
However, these public health applications also generated significant controversy around privacy and civil liberties. Organizations like Foxglove, a UK-based civil rights group, challenged the NHS contracts in court, arguing that Palantir's involvement in healthcare created unacceptable risks to patient privacy and democratic oversight. Critics pointed out that the same technologies being used to track COVID-19 could easily be adapted for more intrusive surveillance of citizen behavior and health status. The privacy concerns weren't entirely theoretical. Palantir's systems can identify not just aggregate health trends, but individual behavior patterns, contact networks, and mobility data that reveal intimate details about people's lives. During the pandemic, this capability was used to track disease spread and optimize public health interventions. But critics worried about what would happen to this surveillance infrastructure once the pandemic ended. These debates highlighted a fundamental tension in Palantir's expansion beyond national security applications. The same capabilities that make the platform valuable for fighting terrorism and managing military operations, its ability to integrate vast amounts of data and identify hidden patterns, also make it potentially dangerous when applied to civilian populations. Unlike military applications, where targets are clearly defined as enemies, public health surveillance affects entire populations who haven't consented to such monitoring. The pandemic ultimately served as a proof of concept for Palantir's broader commercial ambitions. If their platform could handle the data complexity and operational urgency of a global health crisis, it could probably handle similar challenges in other civilian sectors. This success became a crucial selling point as Palantir expanded beyond government contracts into commercial markets. Beyond the battlefield, commercial expansion banks and government regulators use Palantir for anti-money laundering. BP has been a long-time partner. The transition from military and intelligence applications to commercial markets represents perhaps the most significant evolution in Palantir's business model since its founding. The company's leadership recognized that the same analytical capabilities that could identify terrorist networks and coordinate military operations could solve similarly complex problems in civilian industries, from financial crime to supply chain optimization to pharmaceutical research. Airbus, one of the world's largest aerospace manufacturers, provides an excellent example of how Palantir's technology translates to commercial applications. The company's supply chain involves thousands of suppliers across dozens of countries, creating a web of dependencies that traditional management systems struggle to track effectively. When COVID-19 disrupted global trade, many manufacturers discovered they had little visibility into their extended supply networks, leaving them unable to predict or respond to shortages until production lines had already stopped. Palantir's platform gives Airbus something approaching X-ray vision into their supply chain, tracking not just direct suppliers, but the suppliers of those suppliers,
identifying potential bottlenecks before they become critical, and enabling rapid response to disruptions. The system can predict which components are most likely to face shortages, identify alternative suppliers, and optimize logistics to minimize delays. This isn't just cost savings. In aerospace manufacturing, supply chain delays can cost millions of dollars and affect aircraft delivery schedules years in advance. Ferrari's partnership with Palantir demonstrates the technology's application to an entirely different domain: Formula One racing, where data analysis can mean the difference between victory and defeat. Modern F1 cars generate enormous amounts of telemetry data: engine performance, aerodynamics, tire wear, driver behavior, that teams must analyze in real time to optimize race strategy. Palantir's platform integrates this data with external factors like weather conditions, track characteristics, and competitor behavior to help Ferrari make split-second strategic decisions during races. But perhaps more importantly, the Ferrari partnership showcases Palantir's ability to handle time-critical decision-making under extreme pressure, capabilities that translate directly to military and intelligence applications. The same algorithms that help Ferrari decide when to. In the pharmaceutical industry, Palantir's work with Merck illustrates how data integration can accelerate drug discovery and development. Traditional pharmaceutical research involves dozens of separate databases: clinical trial results, molecular modeling data, patient records, regulatory submissions that are often incompatible with each other. Researchers spend enormous amounts of time simply finding and accessing relevant information, leaving less time for actual analysis and discovery. Palantir's platform breaks down these data silos, enabling researchers to identify patterns and connections that would be invisible within individual databases. The system can identify which drug compounds are most likely to succeed in clinical trials, predict potential side effects before they appear in testing, and optimize trial designs to accelerate regulatory approval. These capabilities can shorten drug development timelines by months or years, potentially bringing life-saving treatments to patients faster while reducing development costs. Hospitals represent another growing market for Palantir's technology, particularly in areas like capacity management and operational optimization. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated how quickly healthcare systems can become overwhelmed, but many hospitals lack the data visibility needed to predict and respond to surges in demand. Palantir's platform can integrate data from emergency departments, surgical schedules, staffing systems, and supply chain management to create a comprehensive picture of hospital operations. This commercial expansion reflects Palantir's evolution from a specialized defense contractor to a broader enterprise software company. But it also raises questions about whether the company can maintain its technological advantages as it moves beyond the high-stakes, resource-rich environment of national security. Commercial customers may be less willing to pay premium prices for capabilities they don't fully understand, and competitors like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google have their own AI platforms that may be good enough for many commercial applications. The odd couple, Thiel and Karp. The honchos who created this sprawling Palantir beast are Peter Thiel and Alex Karp. If you were to design two co-founders who seem fundamentally incompatible, you might create Peter Thiel and Alex Karp. Thiel embodies Silicon Valley's libertarian archetype: clean-cut, precisely spoken, obsessed with efficiency and disruption. His previous companies, PayPal, Facebook, were about removing friction, eliminating intermediaries, and letting market forces optimize human behavior. His political views skew toward minimal government, maximum individual freedom, and faith in technological solutions to social problems. Karp represents almost the opposite philosophical tradition, with his shoulder-length hair, eccentric fashion choices, and frequent retreats to his Colorado ski lodge. He looks more like a philosophy professor than a tech CEO, which in fact he was before joining Palantir. His doctoral work at Stanford focused on social theory and the philosophical foundations of democratic institutions. Where Thiel sees technology as liberation from traditional constraints, Karp sees it as a tool for preserving and strengthening the institutions that make liberal democracy possible. This philosophical tension becomes visible in Karp's public statements, which often sound more like academic lectures than corporate messaging. He describes himself as a socialist at heart, who happens to run a company that works closely with military and intelligence agencies. He speaks about the moral responsibility of technologists to defend democratic values against authoritarian threats, but he also acknowledges the inherent tension between surveillance capabilities and civil liberties. Karp's eccentricity extends beyond philosophy into his management style and personal habits. He reportedly conducts some meetings while walking on a treadmill, takes calls while skiing, and has been known to disappear for days or weeks to his Colorado retreat without warning. Former employees describe a culture where Karp might suddenly appear in engineering meetings to debate the ethical implications of a particular algorithm or challenge assumptions about how their technology should be deployed. This creates an unusual dynamic within Palantir's corporate culture. While most tech companies try to project consistency and predictability, Palantir seems to thrive on intellectual tension and philosophical debate. Engineers aren't just building software. They're constantly questioning whether they should build it, how it should be used, and what safeguards need to be in place to prevent misuse.
The Thiel-Karp partnership works because their different perspectives create a form of intellectual checks and balances. Thiel's business acumen and network of contacts provide the resources and opportunities that enable Palantir to grow, while Karp's philosophical grounding ensures that the company maintains some connection to broader questions about technology's role in society. Neither could have created Palantir alone, but together they've built something that reflects both of their worldviews. This philosophical complexity helps explain Palantir's unusual position in Silicon Valley's social ecosystem. While most major tech companies are broadly left-leaning and focus on consumer applications, Palantir explicitly serves government and defense clients while maintaining leadership that spans the political spectrum. This has created both opportunities and challenges. The company can work with clients that other tech companies won't serve, but it also faces criticism from multiple directions. The secrecy that surrounds Palantir's operations adds another layer to the company's mystique. Unlike typical Silicon Valley companies that court publicity and celebrate their impact on daily life, Palantir operates more like an intelligence agency, with strict security protocols, limited public information, and employees who often can't discuss their work in detail. This secrecy is partly necessary due to the classified nature of much of their government work, but it also reflects Karp's belief that some technologies are too powerful and dangerous to be developed in the open. The result is a company culture that combines Silicon Valley's technological ambition with something closer to the ethos of a military or intelligence organization. Employees are expected to think not just about whether they can build something, but whether they should, and what might happen if their technology falls into the wrong hands. This philosophical seriousness is unusual in an industry often criticized for its naive optimism about technology's social impact. Echoes of the Cold War, Silicon Valley's original mission. But I think they have something in common with the old-style Valley of the Cold War era. To understand Palantir's place in Silicon Valley's evolution, you need to remember that the Valley's current image as a playground for consumer apps and social media platforms represents a historical anomaly rather than its natural state. The original Silicon Valley was built on defense contracts, shaped by Cold War competition, and explicitly designed to maintain American technological supremacy against the Soviet Union. DARPA's ARPANET, the precursor to the modern Internet, wasn't created to help people share photos or shop online. It was designed to ensure that American command and control systems could survive a nuclear attack. The distributed, resilient architecture that now enables global commerce was originally a military requirement, developed with taxpayer funding to solve national security problems. The same pattern holds for GPS, touchscreen technology, and many other innovations that later became consumer products. The semiconductor industry that gave Silicon Valley its name was initially driven almost entirely by defense spending. Companies like Fairchild Semiconductor and Intel weren't trying to build better consumer electronics. They were racing to create smaller, more reliable components for military applications like intercontinental ballistic missiles and satellite systems. The integrated circuits that launched the digital revolution were first used in nuclear weapons guidance systems. Lockheed Missiles and Space Company, based in San Jose, employed thousands of engineers and technicians throughout the Cold War,
working on classified projects that pushed the boundaries of materials science, electronics, and systems integration. These weren't abstract research projects. They were responses to specific Soviet capabilities and threats, developed under intense time pressure with virtually unlimited budgets. This defense-oriented culture created a different relationship between technologists and government than what emerged later. Engineers weren't just building products for profit. They saw themselves as part of a larger national project to preserve democratic values against existential threats. The work had moral weight and social purpose that extended far beyond individual companies or careers. Palantir represents, in many ways, a return to this original ethos. Karp frequently speaks about technology's responsibility to defend democratic institutions, echoing.
But there are important differences between the Cold War Valley and Palantir's version of mission-driven technology. The original defense contractors were primarily hardware companies, building missiles, satellites, and communication systems that took years to develop and deploy. Their relationship with government was relatively straightforward. Defense officials defined requirements, companies bid on contracts, and successful bidders delivered specified capabilities on predetermined schedules. Palantir's relationship with government is far more complex and collaborative. Their software platforms evolve continuously, adapting to new threats and requirements in real time. Rather than delivering finished products, Palantir embeds engineers within government agencies, creating ongoing partnerships that blur the traditional boundaries between public and private sector capabilities. This evolution reflects broader changes in the nature of national security threats and technological development. Cold War competition was primarily about hardware, which side could build better missiles, more sophisticated radars, or more reliable communication systems. Contemporary competition increasingly focuses on software, data analysis, and algorithmic capabilities that can be developed and deployed much more rapidly than traditional military hardware. The cultural implications of this shift are significant. Cold War defense contractors operated within rigid bureaucratic structures that prioritized predictability and extensive documentation over speed and adaptability. Projects took decades to complete, involved thousands of engineers working on highly specialized components, and resulted in systems that remained essentially unchanged for their entire operational lifespan. The culture rewarded careful planning, exhaustive testing, and adherence to detailed specifications, values that made sense when you were building nuclear missiles that couldn't be easily updated or recalled. Palantir represents the antithesis of this approach. Their software-driven model emphasizes rapid iteration, continuous deployment, and real-time adaptation to changing requirements. Where Cold War contractors delivered finished products after years of development, Palantir delivers evolving platforms that improve continuously through use. Their engineers embed with end users, gathering feedback and implementing changes within weeks rather than years. This shift reflects Silicon Valley's broader evolution from the defense-oriented culture of the 1960s and 70s to the consumer-focused era of the 1990s and 2000s. For nearly 3 decades, the Valley's most successful companies, Facebook, Google, Uber, Instagram, focused on consumer applications that prioritized engagement, convenience, and entertainment over national security or institutional stability. The greatest technical challenges involved serving billions of users, optimizing advertising revenue, and creating viral content rather than defending against existential threats. But that consumer era now appears to be ending, replaced by a renewed focus on geopolitical competition and technological supremacy. The rise of China as a technological rival, the return of great power competition, and the increasing importance of artificial intelligence and data analytics have created new opportunities for companies willing to work on national security problems. Palantir represents the vanguard of this shift, Silicon Valley returning to its original mission of maintaining American technological advantages, but updated for an era where software and data matter more than hardware and manufacturing.
The company's success has already inspired a new generation of defense-focused startups, from Anduril's autonomous weapons systems to Shield AI's military drones. These companies combine Silicon Valley's technological capabilities with Cold War-era patriotic rhetoric, creating a hybrid culture that borrows from both traditions. They maintain the Valley's emphasis on rapid innovation and technological disruption, while embracing the defense industry's focus on national service and institutional loyalty. This revival of Silicon Valley's national security mission represents more than just a business opportunity. It reflects deeper changes in how Americans think about technology's role in global competition. The naive optimism that characterized the consumer internet era, with its faith that connection and information sharing would naturally promote peace and democracy, has given way to a more complex understanding of technology as a domain of geopolitical competition, where American leadership cannot be taken for granted.
Palantir in the geopolitical arena. If the Cold War defined Silicon Valley's first act, the post-9/11 war on terror its second, then the current era of renewed great power competition has set the stage for Palantir's most consequential role yet. The company is no longer just a contractor solving niche data problems, it is increasingly positioning itself as the central nervous system for Western militaries navigating 21st century conflict. Nowhere is this clearer than in Ukraine. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, Ukraine was initially outgunned, with far fewer tanks, planes, and artillery pieces. What it did have was agility and a willingness to adopt unconventional tools. Palantir quickly stepped in, offering its Gotham and Foundry platforms to Ukrainian defense forces. By fusing satellite imagery, drone reconnaissance, intercepted communications, and even crowdsourced civilian data, Palantir helped Ukraine compress its sensor-to-shooter timeline from hours to minutes. Russian artillery positions that might once have taken a full day to locate could now be targeted within a single battle rhythm. Ukrainian officials have publicly credited Palantir with enabling precise strikes on Russian logistics hubs, artillery batteries, and troop concentrations. The software doesn't just visualize where enemies are, it predicts where they are likely to move, which roads they will resupply on, and how long their ammunition stockpiles might last. In a war where survival often depends on moving faster than the opponent, Palantir's algorithms turned into a literal force multiplier. But this same application has stirred unease in Moscow and Beijing, where Palantir is increasingly framed as the digital arm of NATO. Russian state media describes it as America's private intelligence service, while Chinese military thinkers warn of a new generation of algorithmic warfare, designed not just to destroy hardware, but to dominate the informational battle space. In this sense, Palantir is no longer just a US company, it is part of the West's geostrategic identity. Israel provides another revealing case study. Palantir's technology has been integrated into elements of the Israeli Defense Forces' intelligence and targeting systems, particularly around border security and counter-terrorism missions. Here, the software's ability to map social networks, financial flows, and behavioral anomalies has raised sharp ethical questions. Within NATO, Palantir has been expanding rapidly. Its platforms are being tested for logistics management, intelligence sharing across member states, and even predictive modeling of adversary behavior. The promise is seductive, a single pane of glass where commanders can see everything from troop readiness to satellite reconnaissance in real time. Yet it also raises sovereignty concerns. When multiple countries rely on a single US firm for battlefield decision-making, who truly owns the data? Who decides which patterns are acted upon? These questions are not theoretical. They cut to the heart of alliance politics. The rise of new defense tech rivals. Palantir is not alone in this new defense tech renaissance. Alongside it stand companies like Anduril Industries, founded by Oculus creator Palmer Luckey, and Shield AI, a drone and autonomy specialist. Together, they represent a generational shift. Silicon Valley's return to defense, but this time through venture-backed startups rather than Cold War contractors. Anduril makes for the most illuminating comparison. While Palantir focuses on software platforms that integrate and interpret data, Anduril builds physical systems, drones, surveillance towers, and autonomous vehicles that can patrol borders
or fly missions without direct human control. In Lucky's telling, Palantir is the brain, and Anduril is the body. One provides intelligence and pattern recognition. The other acts on that intelligence with autonomous force. The two companies sometimes compete for Pentagon dollars, but more often complement one another. Imagine a battlefield where Anduril's drones swarm over a contested city, collecting video feeds and signals data, which are then piped into Palantir's Gotham platform for real-time analysis. The output isn't just dots on a map, it's prioritized target lists, recommended courses of action, and predictive models of enemy behavior. The future of warfare may lie less in individual platforms and more in these kinds of ecosystems, where software and hardware interlock seamlessly. Traditional primes like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman are watching closely. While they remain dominant in big-ticket systems like fighter jets and submarines, they risk being leapfrogged in the fast-moving world of AI and data analytics. Already, Pentagon officials speak of a third offset strategy, where algorithmic superiority becomes as important as nuclear deterrence once was. In that race, Palantir and Anduril are not just contractors. They are cultural signals that Silicon Valley has re-entered the business of war in earnest.
The limits of Palantir's model. For all the hype, Palantir faces serious structural challenges. Despite its commercial expansion into industries like healthcare, manufacturing, and energy, more than half of its revenue still comes from government contracts, particularly US defense and intelligence. That dependence makes it vulnerable to political winds. A single administration change or budget cut could reshape its fortunes overnight. Its business model also raises questions. Palantir doesn't sell off-the-shelf software in the way Microsoft or Oracle do. Instead, it embeds teams of engineers within client organizations, customizing platforms to specific needs. This services-heavy model creates deep customer lock-in but limits scalability. Investors wonder, can Palantir ever achieve the margins of a pure software company, or will it remain a consultancy wrapped in the language of AI? There are also doubts about whether Palantir can expand beyond analytics. Unlike Lockheed or Boeing, it has never built a major weapons system. Its strength lies in integration and prediction, not in hardware. In Ukraine, Palantir provides the maps and intelligence, but it is still traditional artillery, tanks, and HIMARS rockets that do the actual fighting. For some critics, this means Palantir's role is overstated. It enhances, but does not replace, conventional military power. Finally, there is the matter of valuation. At its peak, Palantir was valued at over $250 billion, higher than many century-old defense giants with proven manufacturing bases. Yet its revenues, while growing, remain a fraction of those firms. This mismatch has led analysts to warn of a bubble driven more by narrative than fundamentals. Meme stock enthusiasm may keep the rocket ship flying, but gravity has a way of asserting itself eventually.
Leadership and the odd couple dynamic.
No story about Palantir is complete without its co-founders. Peter Thiel, the libertarian billionaire and original PayPal mafioso, and Alex Karp, the eccentric philosopher CEO with long hair and a penchant for skiing, are perhaps the strangest pairing in modern tech. Thiel provided the early capital and ideological spark. A vocal critic of big tech's progressive monoculture, he saw Palantir as a bulwark against both terrorism and what he considered Silicon Valley's self-destructive idealism. His connections in Washington opened doors that few startups could have managed. Karp, by contrast, is the face of Palantir today. With a PhD in philosophy from Frankfurt and a history of academic work on social theory, he positions himself not as a traditional CEO, but as a kind of philosopher king. Employees describe him conducting meetings while pacing on a treadmill, or disappearing to his Colorado retreat to ski and reflect on geopolitics. In interviews, he blends corporate strategy with Nietzschean musings, sometimes veering into what critics call self-indulgent rambling, but admirers see as a rare moral seriousness in tech leadership. This odd couple dynamic shapes Palantir's culture. It is secretive, mission-driven, and unusually political for a Silicon Valley firm. Engineers are encouraged to debate not just technical feasibility but ethical implications.
Should a new feature be built? Who might misuse it? These questions are not theoretical exercises. They are central to the company's identity. Yet critics argue this culture converge on cult-like. Palantir demands intense loyalty and operates with a level of secrecy that makes outsiders uneasy. Unlike Google or Facebook, it does not seek to win over the public. Its true audience is governments and institutions, and its rhetoric, defending the West, preserving democracy, reflects that.
The ethical battleground. Perhaps the most enduring debate about Palantir is not technical or financial, but moral. What does it mean when a private company sells surveillance and targeting tools to governments? Predictive policing offers one cautionary tale. In the 2010s, Palantir quietly partnered with the New Orleans Police Department to test algorithms that identified individuals at high risk of committing or being victims of crime. The program ran in secret for years before being exposed, sparking outrage from civil liberties groups. Critics likened it to the film Minority Report, pre-crime predictions that risked reinforcing racial biases and eroding due process. Then there is immigration enforcement. Palantir's software has been used by ICE to plan raids, track undocumented migrants, and analyze networks of family and employment. Human rights advocates argue this turns Palantir into an engine of deportation, targeting vulnerable populations with the same tools once used against terrorists. Karp has defended the contracts, arguing that elected officials set policy and Palantir merely provides tools. But the controversy has stained the company's reputation among progressives. Even in healthcare, where Palantir's Foundry platform helped manage vaccine distribution during COVID-19, critics worried about patient privacy. Could the same system that tracked ICU capacity be repurposed to monitor citizens' movements, purchases, or even genetic information? In the wrong hands, the possibilities are chilling. Supporters counter that these fears miss the point. Palantir, they argue, makes institutions more precise. Instead of mass surveillance or indiscriminate force, its tools allow for targeted interventions that reduce collateral damage. Better data means fewer false arrests, fewer civilian casualties, and more efficient governance. The ethical issue, they contend, lies not in the software but in how governments choose to use it. Still, the broader philosophical question lingers. Should Silicon Valley build explicitly for war? For decades, tech companies avoided military contracts, preferring to frame themselves as neutral platforms. Palantir has shattered that taboo, embracing its role as a defense company for the algorithmic age. Whether this is a betrayal of Silicon Valley's liberatory ideals or a necessary adaptation to geopolitical reality depends on one's worldview. Closing reflections. Palantir and the future of tech. Palantir's story is not just about one company. It is about the trajectory of an entire industry. In its early decades, Silicon Valley built tools for the Pentagon. In the 1990s and 2000s, it turned inward, chasing consumer markets and advertising dollars. Now, with geopolitical tensions rising and authoritarian powers challenging liberal democracies, the Valley seems to be rediscovering its martial roots. Palantir is both symbol and catalyst of that shift. The company embodies a paradox. It is at once a meme stock, adored by retail investors for its AI buzzwords, and a shadowy defense contractor shaping how wars are fought. It is led by a philosopher who speaks of democracy's survival, and backed by a libertarian billionaire who distrusts democracy's excesses. It sells tools that can both save lives and erode civil liberties. It is simultaneously a bulwark against authoritarianism, and in the eyes of some critics, a harbinger of digital authoritarianism itself. Whether Palantir becomes the Lockheed Martin of the software age or fades as a glorified consultancy remains to be seen. Its valuation may be inflated, its model unproven at scale, and its ethics contested. Yet its impact is undeniable. In Ukraine, in Israel, in NHS England, in American police departments and federal agencies, Palantir's fingerprints are already everywhere. And so the question is less about what Palantir does. We know it analyzes data, builds platforms, wins contracts, and more about what it represents. A new era where Silicon Valley no longer pretends to be apolitical. A time when the same algorithms that recommend TikToks can also recommend missile targets. A world where the business of war
and the business of tech are no longer separate industries but two faces of the same coin. As citizens, investors, and participants in this digital age, we are left with a choice. Do we celebrate Palantir as democracy's defender, ensuring that free societies out-innovate their rivals? Or do we fear it as an architect of a future where surveillance is total, privacy is obsolete, and warfare is automated by code? That choice, like so much of Palantir's business, is not ours alone to make. It is already being made in.
And so I'll leave you with this. If the software that once tracked stolen credit cards can now decide who lives and who dies on the battlefield, what responsibility do we, not just governments, but citizens, investors, and everyday people, bear for its use? Do we cheer Palantir on as a guardian of democracy, trusting that it will always remain in the right hands? Or do we resist the quiet spread of surveillance logic into every corner of society, before the line between defense and domination disappears altogether? The choice is not abstract. Every contract signed, every dataset integrated, every algorithm deployed is done in our name. So ask yourself, when you look at Palantir, do you see a shield that protects your freedom, or a mirror reflecting how much of it you're willing to surrender?